The ancient initiates believed that humanity's greatest tragedy was not ignorance, poverty, or suffering. It was forgetting its own divine nature. They warned that the moment you forget who you are, you begin living as someone else. Most people will spend their entire lives searching for purpose, peace, and happiness without ever discovering why they feel incomplete. The greatest tragedy is not that humanity has lost its way. It is that humanity has forgotten who it is. Every fear, every endless chase for approval, every feeling that something is missing begins with one ancient mistake, forgetting your true nature. A fearful mind will find suffering while walking through paradise, while an awakened mind will discover peace in the middle of a storm. Two people can stand beneath the same sky, face the same hardship, and live entirely different lives. Not because the world changed, but because the mind interpreting it did. This book is not about becoming someone greater than you are. It is about remembering who you have always been. By the end, you will understand why the wisest men and women in history believe that awakening is not the acquisition of new knowledge. It is the recovery of ancient memory. And once that memory begins to return, nothing looks the same again. You are not becoming someone greater. You are uncovering the person you were before. Fear taught Myuzuk you to forget. Chapter 1. The 7 Layers of Forgetfulness. If remembering is the path home, then Myuzuk, forgetfulness, is the road that leads us away from ourselves. The ancients often described awakening as removing veils rather than collecting information. Imagine an old statue buried beneath centuries of dust. The sculptor does not create a new masterpiece. He carefully removes what has covered the beauty already present. Human consciousness works in much the same way. The first layer is fear. Fear once protected our ancestors from genuine danger. Yet when allowed to govern every decision, it becomes an invisible prison. Fear whispers that change is unsafe, truth is dangerous, and growth should wait for another day. A life directed by fear slowly forgets its own courage. The second layer is pride. Myuzuk, pride disguises itself as strength while quietly preventing learning. Those who believe they already know everything rarely discover anything new. Socrates understood this deeply when he claimed that wisdom begins by recognizing one's own ignorance. Humility does not diminish greatness. It prepares the ground for it. The third layer is desire. Desire itself is not the enemy. It inspires creation, exploration, and progress. Yet uncontrolled desire convinces the heart that fulfillment always exists somewhere else, in another possession, another achievement, another victory. The soul forgets that lasting contentment begins within before it ever appears without. The fourth layer is distraction. Perhaps no generation has faced this layer more intensely than our own. Endless information fills the mind while leaving little room for reflection. Ancient initiates deliberately withdraw into deserts, forests, and mountain caves because silence revealed truths that constant activity concealed. The fifth layer is comparison. A tree never measures itself against the mountain. A river does not envy the stars, yet human beings often surrender their peace by comparing their journey with someone else's. Comparison blinds us to our own calling because our attention remains fixed on another person's path. The sixth layer is attachment. Attachment convinces us that identity depends upon possessions, relationships, opinions, or status, but everything visible changes. Empires collapse. Wealth disappears, beauty fades, positions are surrendered. If identity depends upon temporary things, suffering becomes inevitable. Freedom begins when we learn to appreciate life without allowing it to define our deepest self. Finally comes the seventh and Myuzuk, deepest layer, forgetfulness itself. This is not forgetting facts or memories. It is forgetting one's original nature. The divine spark becomes buried beneath years of habit until many people mistake the mask for the face. They no longer ask, "Who Myuzuk am I?" Instead, they ask only, "What must I become to be accepted?" The ancient teachers believed this final layer was the source from which all the others emerged. An old Egyptian tradition tells of a temple initiate who entered 7 successive chambers before reaching the sanctuary. In each chamber, he surrendered something. His weapons, his jewels, his titles, his robes, Myuzuk, and finally even his own name. By the time he reached the innermost chamber, Nothing remained except simple awareness. Only then did the high priest speak, "You have brought nothing with you." The initiate answered, "Everything false has been left behind." "And who are you now?" asked the priest. After a long silence, the initiate smiled for the first time. "I do not know," the priest embraced him. "Then today, your true education begins. The greatest wisdom has never been about adding more to yourself. It has always been about removing what prevents you from recognizing what has quietly existed within you from the beginning. Fear can be observed, pride can be softened, desire can be guided, distraction can be quieted, comparison can be released, attachment can be loosened, and forgetfulness can become remembrance. For beneath every layer waits the same silent truth that Socrates sought, Hermes proclaimed, and generations of seekers carried through the centuries. The self you have been searching for has never been lost. It has only been waiting for you to remember. Chapter 2. The ancient secret hidden inside every human. Hermes Trismegistus described humanity as a reflection of the divine mind itself. In the Corpus Hermeticum, the human soul was not portrayed as a helpless creature trapped by fate, but as a being capable of recognizing its own sacred origin. Music, Socrates pointed in another direction, yet toward the same destination, urging every citizen of Athens with the immortal command, "Know thyself." Centuries later, Epictetus reminded his students that no tyrant could enslave the person who had mastered the kingdom within. Though separated by cultures and generations, these teachers guarded one timeless secret. The greatest discovery a person could ever make was not hidden in the outer world, but within the depths music of consciousness. Imagine a young traveler climbing a mountain in search of an ancient sage. He had crossed rivers, endured storms, and left behind his family because he believed the old master possessed the secret to happiness. After weeks of exhaustion, he finally reached the summit music and entered a quiet stone sanctuary. The old sage welcomed him with a gentle smile. "I have traveled across the world," the young man declared. "Teach me the greatest music secret." Instead of answering, the old man placed a polished bronze mirror into the traveler's hands. Confused, the young man stared at his own reflection. "I did not climb mountains to look at myself," he protested. The sage replied softly, "That is why your journey is not yet complete." Music, the young traveler expected hidden scrolls, sacred rituals, or mysterious formulas. Instead, he was invited into the most difficult pilgrimage of all, the journey inward. This ancient parable continues because it reflects the condition of humanity itself. Most people spend their entire lives searching for fulfillment in distant places while overlooking the silent wisdom already waiting within them. Modern life encourages constant movement. We collect possessions, titles, achievements, and opinions, believing each new acquisition will complete something missing inside us. Yet, the more we gather, the more many people feel strangely empty. Ancient philosophers recognized this paradox long ago. They understood that forgetting the self creates a hunger that no external success can satisfy. Hermes taught that humanity mirrors the universe because both emerge from the same divine mind. The stars above and the consciousness within participate in one living order. To know yourself, therefore, is not an act of selfishness, but an act of remembering your place within creation. Socrates spent his life asking questions rather than delivering easy answers. He believed wisdom began the moment a person admitted how little they truly understood about themselves. His conversations stripped away certainty until only honest self-examination remained. That humility became the doorway to genuine awakening. Epictetus carried this wisdom into everyday life. Born into slavery, he discovered a freedom that no chain could touch. Others controlled his body, but they could not command his thoughts, his character, or his response to suffering. He taught that while circumstances belong to fate, our inner judgments belong to us. In that distinction lies extraordinary freedom, yet if this inheritance belongs to every human being, why do so few recognize it? Because civilizations often reward distraction more than reflection. Noise replaces silence. Comparison replaces gratitude. Music achievement replaces understanding. Identity becomes something built from public approval rather than inner truth. Generation after generation, People inherit music, names, traditions, fears, ambitions, and expectations before they ever discover who they truly are. Music, the original self, becomes hidden beneath countless borrowed identities. This is why ancient mystery schools demanded long periods of silence before admitting new initiates. They understood that wisdom cannot enter a mind already crowded with endless noise. Before receiving new knowledge, one must first remove the illusions that conceal the knowledge already present. The divine spark has never disappeared. It has only been forgotten. Awakening does not mean becoming someone greater than you are today. It means uncovering the part of yourself that existed before fear, pride, and conditioning taught you to live as someone else. Every genuine spiritual tradition eventually arrives at this same threshold. Remember, not invent, not acquire. Remember, everything begins there. Chapter 3. Walking Between Heaven and Earth. The greatest mistake of every age has been to imagine that the spiritual life begins only after withdrawing from ordinary responsibilities. Some have believed enlightenment belongs only to mountain caves, desert monasteries, or hidden temples where silence reigns uninterrupted. Yet the wisest teachers repeatedly returned to the marketplace after discovering truth. They knew that wisdom proved itself not in isolation but in daily life. The Hermetic initiate was never asked to abandon the world. He was asked to walk through it differently. Music. Imagine a young apprentice who traveled to study under an aged master renowned throughout the Mediterranean, expecting secret ceremonies and hidden chambers. The apprentice instead found the old philosopher tending a neglected garden, repairing broken pottery, welcoming strangers, and sharing simple meals with travelers. Days became weeks. Music weeks became months. Still no mysterious initiation came. Music finally, unable to contain his disappointment, the apprentice spoke. "Master, Music," he asked, "when will you reveal the sacred teachings?" The old man placed another seed into the earth before answering. "I have been revealing them every day." The apprentice looked around in confusion. "I have seen nothing except ordinary work." The master smiled gently. "Exactly." That evening, as they watched the sun disappear behind distant hills, the old teacher continued. "The divine mind hides itself inside ordinary moments because proud people search only for extraordinary ones." Those words transformed the apprentice more than any elaborate ritual ever could. The Hermetic sages believed that every task reflected a greater reality. Sweeping a floor could become an act of ordering one's own thoughts. Music, planting a tree, reflected faith in a future one might never personally witness. Preparing food became gratitude expressed through action rather than words. Nothing was merely ordinary. Everything participated in the unseen order. Stoic philosophers reached a remarkably similar conclusion. Marcus Aurelius ruled one of history's greatest empires. Yet his private writings rarely celebrated conquest or wealth. Instead, he reminded himself each morning that the highest calling was simply to perform today's duty with justice, patience, humility, and reason. He did not separate philosophy from leadership. Leadership became philosophy and action. Epictetus offered the same lesson from the opposite end of society. Together they walked through a narrow passage into a small inner chamber almost entirely empty. There were no elaborate paintings, no treasures, no statues of gold, only a single polished stone that reflected anyone who stood before it. The traveler waited for some great revelation. Instead, the priest whispered, "The longest journey in every human life is from the eyes to the soul." That was the temple's greatest secret. The sanctuary had never been built merely to impress visitors. Music, it existed to direct them inward. So too, the Gnostic sages taught that salvation was not simply rescue from external circumstances, but awakening from inner forgetfulness. They used the Greek word gnosis, meaning direct inner knowledge, not knowledge gathered from argument alone, but truth recognized through experience. This distinction remains profoundly relevant today. Many people accumulate information without ever cultivating wisdom. Music, they know countless facts about the world while remaining strangers to themselves. They understand technology, economics, and history, yet rarely pause long enough to ask the oldest question ever spoken. Who am I beneath every role I perform? Psychologically, this forgotten spark resembles what many later thinkers described as the authentic self. Music, the part of human consciousness untouched by social expectation or inherited conditioning. Beneath childhood fears, beneath success and failure, beneath praise and criticism. Music, something quiet remains. It does not compete. It does not boast. It simply waits. The Gnostic masters believed awakening begins the moment attention turns inward with sincerity rather music, than outward with endless craving. This does not require abandoning ordinary life. It requires inhabiting it consciously. Each moment of honest reflection removes another veil. Each act of compassion uncovers another fragment of forgotten light. Each courageous decision strengthens remembrance. Slowly, the sleeping spark begins to glow again. Not because something new has been added, because something ancient has been recognized. An old desert elder once welcomed a young seeker who begged for enlightenment. The elder handed him a weathered oil lamp blackened by years of smoke. "Clean it," he instructed. The young man spent the day polishing the lamp until the metal beneath shone brilliantly. When he returned, the elder lit the flame. The light filled the room. "It burns beautifully now," the young man said. The elder smiled. The flame was always capable of shining. It only needed the soot removed. So it is with every human soul. The divine spark has never abandoned you. Fear may cover it, pride may conceal it, distraction may silence it, yet none of these can extinguish it. For what you seek has never been somewhere beyond the horizon. It has been quietly waiting beneath every layer of forgetfulness. The ancient teachers spoke in different voices, but they all pointed toward the same destination. What you seek is within. Chapter 5. Music, the 7 Keys of Awakening. Every ancient civilization preserved a similar secret, though each clothed it in different symbols. The language differed. The destination remained the same. Human consciousness, they believed, is not transformed by chance, but by deliberate cultivation. Just as a locked temple requires the proper keys before its inner sanctuary can be entered, the human spirit possesses hidden chambers that reveal themselves only through disciplined living. The greatest tragedy is not that these keys have been lost. It is that they have been forgotten. The first key is awareness. The Buddha taught that most suffering begins long before pain itself. It begins when the mind moves unconsciously, reacting automatically to every thought, emotion, and circumstance. The Dharmapada reminds us that the mind shapes experience, making awareness the foundation upon which every other virtue rests. Psychologically, awareness interrupts automatic behavior. Modern life trains people to live by habit, moving from one obligation to another without truly seeing their own thoughts. Fear appears and they become fear. Anger appears and they become anger. Anxiety whispers and they believe it speaks the truth. Yet awareness changes everything. The observer discovers that thoughts are events, not identity. The practical lesson is beautifully simple. Several times each day, pause before reacting. Take one conscious breath. Ask quietly, what is truly happening within me? In that brief moment, awareness loosens the grip of unconscious living. Awareness opens the first gate. The second key is silence. Ancient hermits retreated into deserts not because they hated humanity, but because they understood that truth speaks softly. Noise is the language of distraction. Silence is the language of wisdom. Today the greatest deserts are no longer made of sand. They are made of constant stimulation. Every notification, opinion, advertisement, and argument competes for attention, until the inner voice becomes almost impossible to hear. Silence restores that forgotten conversation. When the surface of a lake becomes perfectly still, it reflects the heavens without distortion. The human mind behaves the same way. Only a quiet heart can recognize deeper truths hidden beneath restless thinking. Practice a few moments of intentional silence every morning. Do not seek extraordinary experiences. Simply become available to yourself. Silence reveals what noise conceals. The third key is discernment. Socrates questioned assumptions. Hermetic sages warned against appearances. Proverbs praised wisdom above riches. Across traditions, discernment meant learning to distinguish truth from illusion. This ability has become even more valuable in every generation. People are easily persuaded by popularity, appearance, and immediate emotion. Yet the wise person asks deeper questions. Is this true? Myazuk, does this lead toward wisdom? Who benefits from my believing this? Psychologically, discernment prevents manipulation. It slows impulsive judgment and replaces emotional certainty with thoughtful examination. The practical application is simple yet demanding. Before accepting any belief, examine it patiently. Not everything repeated often becomes true. Discernment protects awakening. The fourth key is courage. No awakening occurs without courage because every genuine transformation requires leaving something familiar behind. Plato's prisoner who escaped the cave had to abandon comforting illusions. Abraham left his homeland. Siddhartha left his palace. The desert fathers abandoned status and comfort. Every authentic journey begins with a difficult departure. Fear promises safety. Courage promises growth. Psychologically, courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that truth matters more than comfort. Every day offers opportunities to practice it. Speak honestly. Forgive first. Begin the work you have delayed. Walk toward what gives life deeper meaning. Small acts of courage prepare the soul for greater ones. The fifth key is compassion. Many people imagine compassion as softness. Ancient wisdom understood it as profound strength. Confucius taught benevolence. The Stoics recognized shared humanity. Early Christian mystics saw every person as carrying divine dignity. Buddhist teachers spoke of boundless loving kindness. Compassion dissolves the illusion of separation. Psychologically, it transforms resentment into understanding instead of asking why are they difficult. Compassion begins asking what unseen burden might they carry. This shift changes relationships entirely. Practically, compassion begins with attentive listening. Most people hunger less for advice than for genuine presence. Compassion heals both giver and receiver. The sixth key is truth. Hermes Trismegistus declared that knowledge of reality begins with knowledge of oneself. Socrates accepted death rather than abandon truth. Throughout history, sages have paid enormous prices for honesty. Truth often arrives quietly. It rarely flatters. It frequently asks for change. Many prefer comforting stories over transforming realities because illusion protects the ego while truth reshapes it. Myazuk, psychologically, truth dissolves self-deception. The stories we repeatedly tell ourselves eventually become invisible prisons. Freedom begins the moment those stories are questioned. Ask yourself regularly, what uncomfortable truth am I avoiding? That single question possesses remarkable power. Truth liberates what denial imprisons. The seventh key is Myazuk, presence. Presence gathers together every previous key. Without awareness, presence cannot exist. Without silence, it cannot deepen. Without discernment, it loses clarity. Without courage, it remains superficial. Without compassion, it becomes self-centered. Without truth, it becomes illusion. Presence means inhabiting this moment completely. Modern life encourages living everywhere except here. Regret pulls attention toward yesterday. Anxiety drags it toward tomorrow. Myazuk, presence, gently returns consciousness to the only place life is ever experienced. Here now, the practical discipline is wonderfully ordinary. When eating, simply eat. When listening, truly listen. When walking, notice each step. When speaking with another person, offer your complete attention rather than half your awareness. Presence transforms ordinary moments into sacred encounters. Together, these 7 keys form a complete path. Awareness awakens, silence listens, discernment sees, courage moves, compassion embraces, truth clarifies, presence completes. These are not separate virtues. They are 7 expressions of one awakened consciousness. Long ago, an old temple keeper welcomed travelers seeking hidden wisdom. Many expected secret manuscripts or sacred relics. Instead, he handed each visitor 7 ordinary iron keys. Confused, they asked, "Which one opens the treasure chamber?" The old man smiled. "None of them." "Then why give them to us? So that every time you hold them, you remember the 7 doors that must first be opened within yourself." Only years later did the travelers finally understand. The true temple had always been the human heart. Chapter Myazuk 6, The Prison Called Identity. Among the most subtle teachings preserved by ancient philosophers is the warning that the greatest deception is not found outside the human mind but within it. It is the quiet belief that the roles we perform are the people we truly are. From childhood, identity begins to accumulate like layers of clothing. A name, a family, a profession, a nationality, docus, filters, titles, reputations. Each layer serves a purpose, yet none fully defines the person beneath it. The tragedy begins when the mask is mistaken for the face. The Gnostic teachers described humanity as forgetting its true origin beneath countless coverings. Stoic philosophers reminded themselves daily that wealth, status, and reputation belong to fortune rather than to the soul. Epictetus insisted that external labels could never imprison the person who knew what truly belonged to them. The world says, become someone. Wisdom asks, who were you before you believed all these stories? Psychology offers a remarkably similar insight. Much of what people call personality consists of learned adaptations developed for acceptance, survival, or protection. A child praised only for achievement grows into an adult who believes love must always be earned. Another learns to hide emotion because vulnerability once invited ridicule. Over time, these strategies become so familiar that they appear to be identity itself. Yet, they are only habits, not essence. Imagine an actor performing the same role every evening for 40 years. Night after night, he wears the same costume, speaks the same lines, and receives applause for becoming someone else. Eventually, a young admirer asks him, "Who are you?" When the curtain falls, the old actor remains silent. For the first time in decades, he realizes he no longer knows. Many lives unfold in precisely this way. People become their profession, their achievements, their disappointments, their possessions, their political opinions, their public image, their suffering. Each identity offers temporary certainty while quietly hiding the deeper self beneath it. The ego is not evil. It developed to organize experience, protect the individual, and navigate society. Like a useful servant, it performs necessary tasks. Problems arise only when the servant claims the throne. The ego constantly compares. It fears insignificance. It seeks music approval. It defends every opinion because disagreement feels like personal attack. Ancient wisdom never demanded destroying the ego. Music it taught placing it in proper relationship to awareness. The rider guides the horse. The horse does not guide the rider. This shift changes everything. Music, instead of saying, "I am a failure," awareness gently observes, "I experienced failure." Instead of declaring, "I am anxious," awareness notices, "Music anxiety is visiting me." Instead of believing, "I am my reputation." Wisdom remembers that reputation belongs to other people's opinions, not to the soul itself. Music freedom begins in this subtle distinction. A remarkable story survives from the early desert fathers. A respected monk had become famous for his wisdom. Pilgrims traveled immense distances simply to hear him speak. His reputation spread throughout neighboring lands. One evening, an elderly visitor arrived unexpectedly. Rather than praising the monk, the visitor quietly asked, "When no one comes to hear your wisdom, who remains?" The monk could not answer. For several days, he withdrew into silence. When he finally returned, his disciples noticed something different. He spoke less. He smiled more. Someone asked what had changed. He replied, "Music. I discovered I had begun protecting my reputation more carefully than my soul." From that day forward, he welcomed obscurity as readily as recognition. He had remembered that the mask is useful, but it is never the self. Every civilization has honored those who reached this understanding. They moved through the world fulfilling responsibilities faithfully, while refusing to let any role define the entirety of who they were. Parents remained more than parents. Kings remained more than kings. Teachers remained more than teachers. They carried every responsibility lightly because they remembered something deeper remained untouched beneath changing circumstances. Music, entity built upon appearances, constantly fears loss. Identity rooted in awareness cannot be taken away. When titles disappear, when fortunes change, when youth fades, when applause grows silent, the deeper self remains potent, unbroken, waiting to be remembered. The greatest prison has never been made of stone. It has always been the belief that we are only the masks we wear. The greatest liberation arrives when those masks become tools instead of prisons. For the mask is not the self. It never was. Chapter 7. Epictetus and the Prison of Perception. There is an ancient story about a prisoner who spent nearly 20 years behind the walls of a Roman fortress. Music, every morning he awoke to the same gray stones. Every evening the same iron gate closed before him. Visitors pied him, believing that no man could remain hopeful under such conditions. Yet when he was finally released, those who met him were astonished. Music, his face carried neither bitterness nor defeat. Someone asked him the question. Everyone wished to know. How did you survive so many years without losing yourself? The old prisoner smiled gently. They imprisoned my body only after I refused to imprison my mind. Whether the story is history music, or parable matters less than the truth it reveals. It echoes one of the greatest lessons taught by the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, a man who himself was born into slavery. Few people could have understood external limitation more deeply than he did. Yet instead of teaching resentment, he taught an astonishing form of freedom. It is not events that disturb us, he taught, but our judgments about them. Those few words have echoed across centuries because they reveal a prison that exists long before iron bars ever appear. The prison of perception. Most people imagine that suffering is created directly by circumstances. They believe disappointment comes from failure, anxiety comes from uncertainty, and anger comes from other people. Ancient wisdom quietly disagrees. Between every event and every emotional reaction stands a hidden interpreter. The human mind. Two travelers may walk through the same desert. One curses the endless sand, seeing only hardship and emptiness. The other watches the same horizon with wonder, believing every step is carrying him toward wisdom. The landscape remains identical. Only perception changes. Psychology now confirms what the Stoics observed through disciplined self-examination. Human beings rarely respond to reality exactly as it is. Instead, music, they respond to the meaning they assign to reality. A delayed opportunity becomes proof that life is unfair. A criticism becomes evidence of personal worthlessness. A failure becomes an identity instead of a lesson. The event lasts a moment. Music, the interpretation can last a lifetime. This explains why invisible suffering often exceeds visible suffering. Two merchants may lose their fortunes during the same storm. One spends the remainder of his life believing fate has abandoned him. The other quietly begins rebuilding, convinced that character remains richer than coin. The same loss, different worlds, perception creates experience. Epictetus repeatedly reminded his students that external events belong partly to fortune, but interpretation belongs entirely to consciousness. Freedom begins the moment a person recognizes this distinction. Imagine standing before a mirror that has become covered in dust after many years. Eventually, you begin believing the world itself has grown dim. You clean your clothes. You light brighter candles. You blame the weather. Only later do you discover the music problem was never outside. The mirror required cleaning. The mind works in exactly the same way. Fear, resentment, pride, and wounded memory gradually cloud perception until every experience reflects their distortion. We no longer see life. We see our conditioning. This is why ancient philosophers insisted upon daily examination. Music, Marcus Aurelius reviewed his thoughts each evening. Buddhist monks observed the arising of every emotion without immediately identifying with it. Desert fathers questioned every inner impulse before accepting it as truth. They understood a profound principle. Unexamined interpretations quietly become destiny. Modern life makes this prison even more difficult to recognize. News feeds reward outrage. Comparison replaces gratitude. Every disagreement becomes personal. Every inconvenience appears catastrophic. The mind becomes conditioned to interpret ordinary difficulties as permanent threats. Without noticing it, perception becomes captive. The first step toward liberation is surprisingly simple. Question the story. When disappointment arrives, ask yourself, what else could this mean? When fear appears, ask, is this fact or interpretation? When anger rises, pause long enough to separate the event from the explanation you have attached to it. This single habit gradually weakens unconscious reactions. Awareness enters where habit once ruled. Imagine a king walking through his palace, wearing colored glass before his eyes. Through red lenses, he sees danger everywhere. Through blue lenses, every face appears sorrowful. Through dark lenses, the palace itself seems cold and lifeless. His advisors cannot convince him otherwise because he mistakes the color of the glass for the nature of reality. One day, an elderly servant quietly removes the lenses while the king sleeps. When morning comes, nothing outside has changed. Yet everything appears different. The palace has become brighter, its people kinder, its gardens more beautiful. Reality was never transformed. Perception was such the quiet miracle. Epictetus invites every human being to discover. Music, your circumstances may influence your life, but they do not possess the final authority over your inner world. That authority belongs to consciousness. Every interpretation can be questioned. Every belief can be examined. Every emotional prison music contains an invisible door. The key has always been awareness. Question your interpretations. Freedom begins there. Perception creates experience. Chapter 8. Hermes Trismegist and the Forgotten Origin. Among all the mysterious figures preserved within ancient wisdom, none stands surrounded by greater silence than Hermes Trismegist. Neither entirely historical nor entirely mythical, Hermes became known as thrice great because later generations believed he united the wisdom of philosopher, priest, and king. The writings attributed to him, the Corpus Hermeticum, did not merely teach astronomy, alchemy, or sacred symbolism. They asked humanity a single overwhelming question. Do you remember where you came from? According to Hermetic tradition, the greatest tragedy is not ignorance. It is forgetfulness. Human beings wander through life believing themselves to be isolated creatures struggling against an indifferent universe. While beneath ordinary awareness rests a far deeper identity, Hermetic teaching speaks symbolically of humanity as carrying within itself a reflection of the divine mind, the source from which all wisdom, creativity, and life arise. Whether one interprets this spiritually, philosophically, or psychologically, the invitation remains the same. Look beyond the surface of the self. Remember your deeper nature. The Poor One of the central Hermetic dialogues portrays this awakening through vivid imagery. The seeker encounters divine mind not to receive magical powers, but to remember his true origin. Knowledge is not presented as the accumulation of information. It is remembrance. This idea appears across many ancient traditions. Plato described learning as recollection. The Gnostic writings speak of awakening from forgetfulness. Eastern philosophies describe enlightenment as recognizing one's original nature. The language differs. The direction remains remarkably similar. Modern psychology echoes this insight in unexpected ways. Many people spend years constructing identities based upon fear, success, failure, profession, reputation, or childhood experience. Eventually, they mistake these temporary layers for the whole person. Music, Hermetic wisdom gently asks, who existed before all those stories? Imagine an eagle raised among chickens. From the day it hatches, it learns to scratch the earth, avoid the sky, and believe short leaps are the highest possible music, flight. Every bird around it confirms the same belief. One day, an old traveler notices the young eagle staring toward distant music mountains. You were not made only for the ground, he says. The eagle laughs. I have never flown. That proves only what you have practiced. Slowly, the traveler leads the bird to a high cliff. At first, there is terror. Every habit argues against the leap. Then instinct awakens. The wings unfold. What seemed impossible suddenly feels strangely familiar. The eagle does not become something new. It remembers what it always was. Hermetic teachers believed humanity lives much the same way. We inherit habits of limitation. We accept inherited beliefs. We identify with fear. Yet beneath these layers remains an astonishing creative capacity waiting to be recognized. Music. This is why Hermetic philosophy declares that the universe is fundamentally mental, not in the sense that physical reality is unreal, but in the sense that consciousness profoundly shapes human experience. The world each person inhabits is filtered through perception, meaning imagination, expectation, memory, and belief. Two people may stand before identical opportunities. One sees possibility. Another sees inevitable failure. The outer circumstance remains the same. The inner world determines the response. Mind shapes worlds. This teaching has often been misunderstood. It does not suggest that every event is simply wished into existence or that disciplined thought eliminates every hardship. Ancient Hermetic philosophy never encouraged denial of reality. Instead, it taught mastery of the inner life. The initiate learns that while external events cannot always be controlled, the condition of consciousness profoundly influences interpretation, decision-making, creativity, resilience, and action. The inner world quietly influences the outer one through countless choices made every day. Observe a skilled architect. Long before stone rises from the earth, an invisible design already exists within the mind. Every magnificent temple, bridge, library, and city first appeared as thought before becoming visible form. Civilizations themselves begin invisibly. So do lives. Every habit begins as an unnoticed decision. Every relationship begins with a conversation. Every achievement begins with imagination. Every transformation begins within consciousness. Hermes therefore instructed seekers not merely to study sacred writings, music, but to study themselves. Observe your mental habits. Notice the thoughts repeated most often. Watch where attention naturally settles. Ask whether your inner conversations create clarity or confusion, courage or fear, wisdom or reaction. The mind left unattended becomes a noisy marketplace. The disciplined mind becomes a sacred sanctuary. There is an old Hermetic legend of a young initiate who traveled great distances seeking the secret chamber where the wisdom of the universe was hidden. After years of exhausting pilgrimage, he finally reached the ancient temple and asked the elder guardian to reveal the sacred chamber. The guardian handed him a polished bronze mirror. Confused, the young traveler asked, "Where is the hidden chamber?" The elder replied, "You have been carrying its entrance since the day you were born." Only after years of contemplation did the initiate understand the mirror was consciousness itself. When it reflected fear, the world appeared hostile. When it reflected pride, the world became a battlefield. When it reflected wisdom, compassion, and truth, creation itself seemed transformed. The chamber had never been hidden inside the temple. It had always existed within the human soul. Hermes Trismegistus left no promise of effortless power. He offered something infinitely greater. The possibility that beneath every fear, every role, every disappointment, music, and every forgotten dream lives a deeper identity, waiting patiently to be remembered. Contemplate your deeper nature, for origin determines destiny, and the mind wisely governed shapes worlds. Chapter 9. The Living Initiate. There is an old saying preserved in several wisdom traditions. The true master is recognized not by the number of disciples who follow him, but by the peace that follows wherever he walks. Long before humanity built universities or libraries, the greatest lessons were carried by living people rather than written books. A traveler would journey hundreds of miles, not to hear complicated lectures, but simply to observe how a wise elder spoke, music, listened, worked, forgave, and endured hardship. The lesson was never separated from the life. This was the meaning of becoming an initiate. Modern culture often imagines initiation as the receiving of secret information, hidden rituals, or mysterious symbols. Ancient traditions understood it differently. Knowledge alone never transformed anyone. A person became an initiate only when wisdom moved from the mind into character. One may memorize every sacred text, music, and still remain ruled by anger. Another may never own a single scroll and yet radiate wisdom through every action. The first possesses information. The second possesses transformation. This distinction appears throughout the ancient world. Socrates never claimed to possess ultimate knowledge. Instead, music. He demonstrated humility through relentless self-examination. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, music, yet continually reminded himself to remain a servant of justice rather than a slave to pride. Confucius taught that virtue becomes visible not through speeches, but through consistent conduct. Even the Desert Fathers withdrew into silence because they believed that character grows quietly away from applause. The initiate becomes the teaching. Imagine two lamps standing in the darkness. The first endlessly explains how light works. It describes flames, speaks eloquently about illumination, and debates the nature of fire. The second says nothing. It simply burns. Those who enter the room understand more from its light than from 1,000 explanations. Human beings are much the same. People rarely remember every word spoken by a wise person. They remember how they felt in that person's presence. Calmness can be contagious. Integrity can inspire without speaking. Compassion often teaches more deeply than instruction. This quiet influence is one of the forgotten powers of character. Psychology now recognizes something ancient teachers intuitively understood. Human beings constantly learn through observation. Children imitate emotional patterns long before they understand language. Communities gradually reflect the behavior of respected individuals. Even moods quietly spread through families, friendships, and workplaces. Character is never private. Every life becomes an invisible lesson to someone else. That is why ancient philosophy placed such enormous importance upon daily conduct. The initiate asks each morning, what kind of atmosphere will my presence create today? Will fear spread through my words or courage? Will impatience multiply or understanding? Will my reactions deepen conflict or quietly dissolve it? The answers shape far more than personal happiness. They shape everyone encountered along the way. There is an old story from ancient China about a village troubled by constant disputes. Families argued over land. Merchants cheated customers and neighbors no longer trusted one another. Many scholars arrived with complicated laws, clever speeches, and harsh punishments. Yet nothing truly changed. One spring, an elderly traveler settled quietly beside the village well. He repaired broken tools without asking for payment. He greeted every stranger with patience. When insulted, he answered gently. When praised, he smiled and continued working. Weeks became months. Children began helping him. Merchants slowly became more honest. Neighbors apologized to one another. The village gradually transformed. Someone finally asked the old traveler, "What teaching did you give these people?" The elder laughed softly. "I gave none." Then why did everything change? Because people believe their ears far less than their eyes. They watched and then they remembered. Whether the story happened exactly as told matters little. Its wisdom has survived because it reveals something profoundly true. Transformation spreads through embodiment. This is why humility became one of the highest virtues among ancient initiates. Humility does not mean thinking poorly of oneself, nor does it mean denying one's gifts. It means refusing to place the self at the center of everything. The humble person becomes available to truth. Pride believes it has already arrived. Humility continues walking, like water flowing into low places. Wisdom naturally enters the mind, willing to remain teachable. The greatest obstacle to awakening is rarely ignorance. It is certainty. The initiate therefore guards against spiritual vanity more carefully than against ordinary failure. One may become proud of knowledge, proud of discipline, proud even of humility itself. The ego has endless disguises. Only continuous self-observation reveals them. Durvas protects against this illusion. Across many traditions, genuine wisdom eventually expresses itself through contribution rather than self-importance. The Buddha returned to teach. Stoic philosophers served their communities. Confucian scholars advised rulers for the good of society. Hermetic wisdom encouraged seekers to become living examples rather than isolated mystics. Knowledge that serves only the self slowly withers. Knowledge shared through compassion becomes alive. Perhaps this explains why the wisest people often appear remarkably ordinary. They do not seek admiration. They seek usefulness. They do not attempt to appear extraordinary. They simply strive to become increasingly truthful. Such people rarely announce themselves. Yet their presence quietly changes families, friendships, workplaces, and even generations. They remind others of possibilities long forgotten. This is the final stage of initiation. The manuscript is no longer carried in the hand, it is carried in the heart. The lesson is no longer memorized. It is lived, become the teaching, for the world remembers lives more deeply than words. Chapter 10. Polarity. The hidden bridge between opposites. Music everything appears divided. Yet many opposites belong to the same underlying reality. Heat and cold, light and shadow, joy and sorrow, successor and failure, love and hate. Rather than existing as isolated forces, they often represent different degrees upon the same continuum. Ancient wisdom did not deny the reality of emotional extremes. Instead, it taught that understanding their relationship grants remarkable inner freedom. Consider fire. A small flame warms the traveler. An uncontrolled blaze destroys the forest. The same element creates comfort or catastrophe depending upon its intensity and direction. Human emotions behave similarly. Fear protects us from genuine danger. Excessive fear imprisons life itself. Confidence inspires noble action. Excessive confidence becomes arrogance. The goal is not emotional suppression. It is wise mastery. Modern psychology increasingly supports this ancient observation. Emotions are not enemies to eliminate, but signals to understand. When examined rather than blindly obeyed, they become sources of information instead of chains of reaction. Hermetic philosophers understood this centuries ago. Transformation begins not by fighting emotion but by changing one's relationship to it. Fear and courage illustrate this beautifully. Many imagine courage as the absence of fear. Ancient warriors disagreed. Music, the samurai spoke of calm action despite fear. Stoics accepted discomfort music without surrendering to it. Heroes throughout mythology walked forward while uncertainty remained. Courage is not life without fear. It is fear transformed into purposeful movement. The same principle appears in love and hate. At first glance they seem entirely opposed, yet both often reveal intense emotional investment. Indifference, not hatred, is frequently love's true opposite. Ancient teachers therefore encouraged students to examine powerful emotions before acting upon them. Sometimes what appears as hatred hides wounded affection. Sometimes anger conceals grief. Since childhood, he had been taught that its people were enemies beyond redemption. When war finally came, he entered battle burning with hatred. Music. During the fighting, he found an injured soldier lying alone beneath a broken olive tree. The wounded man whispered, "Water." Music. The prince recognized the enemy's uniform and nearly walked away. Then he noticed something unexpected. Around the soldier's neck hung a small wooden carving identical to one his own father had once given him as a child. Curiosity overcame resentment. The two men spoke. The prince discovered the stranger loved his family, feared death, laughed with friends, and dreamed of peace exactly as he did. The hatred that had filled his heart suddenly dissolved. Nothing outside had changed. The battlefield remained. The nations remained divided. Yet one illusion disappeared forever. He no longer saw an enemy. He saw another human being. This ancient story survives because it illustrates the hidden bridge between opposites. Ignorance became understanding. Hatred became compassion. Division became recognition. Such transformations occur first within consciousness. Success and failure reveal another form of polarity. Many people interpret success as proof of worth and failure as permanent defeat. Ancient philosophers refused this illusion. Every failure contains instruction unavailable through easy victory. Every success carries hidden temptations toward pride and complacency. The wise person therefore greets both with balanced awareness. Neither defines identity. Both become teachers. This balance requires practice. When disappointment arrives, avoid immediate conclusions. When triumph arrives, music, remain grateful rather than arrogant. Observe emotional movement without becoming enslaved by it. Ask quietly what lesson hides within this moment. That single question shifts consciousness from reaction to transformation. Hermetic masters called this process mental transmutation, the deliberate refinement of one's inner condition. They understood that while circumstances fluctuate endlessly, consciousness can learn to remain centered amid both praise and criticism, gain and loss, certainty and uncertainty. The bridge between opposites is awareness. Walk it often, for life will always contain light and shadow. The initiate learns not to fear either. Instead, both become instruments of awakening. Love and hate, fear and courage, success and failure. They are not merely opposing destinations. They are different points upon the same road. Master the movement between them and you begin to master yourself. Chapter 11. Humanity's Forgotten Future. Every civilization leaves behind monuments. Some leave towering pyramids. Music, some leave marble temples. Some leave libraries, roads, laws, or great works of art. Yet the greatest civilizations leave something invisible. They leave transformed human beings. History often teaches us to measure greatness through empires, armies, inventions, and wealth. Ancient wisdom measured it differently. The true measure of a civilization was the quality of consciousness its people carried. A society filled with fearful, greedy, distracted minds could possess magnificent buildings while quietly collapsing from within. Another society with fewer possessions but greater wisdom could influence humanity for centuries. The future has always been born inside the human heart before it appeared in the world. This is the forgotten future. Many people believe history changes only through kings, presidents, music generals, or famous leaders. Ancient philosophers rarely agreed. Confucius insisted that good government begins with self-government. Marcus Aurelius believed the character of one individual quietly influences everyone around them. The Buddha transformed countless lives without commanding an army. Socrates owned little, held no political office. Yet his conversations continue shaping minds more than 2,000 years later. Invisible influence often outlasts visible power. There is an old story from ancient China music about a gardener who planted walnut trees. Although he knew he would never live long enough to enjoy their shade, a traveler stopped beside him and laughed. "Why plant trees whose fruit you will never taste?" The old gardener smiled without looking up. "My grandfather planted trees whose fruit fed me. If I refuse to plant because I will not benefit immediately, then I become the generation that ends the harvest." The traveler stood silently for several moments before picking up another shovel. The gardener never argued. He simply demonstrated the future. Our lives resemble that garden more than we often realize. Every conversation plants seeds. Every music, act of kindness teaches someone how kindness feels. Every moment of patience interrupts cycles of anger that may have existed for generations. Likewise, every selfish act, every music, careless word, every dishonesty becomes another seed whose harvest someone else may inherit. Consciousness spreads quietly. Modern psychology now speaks of emotional contagion, the reality that emotions move from person to person almost invisibly. Music neuroscientists describe mirror neurons, explaining how human beings unconsciously imitate one another's attitudes and behaviors. Ancient wisdom taught this long before laboratories existed. It simply used different language. As within, so without. What exists inside one heart eventually touches many others. Imagine entering a crowded room where one calm, joyful person quietly speaks with everyone. Their peace gradually softens anxious conversations. People begin smiling more easily. Voices become gentler. Nothing dramatic happens. No speech is delivered. No command is given. Presence alone changes the atmosphere. Now imagine the opposite. One angry individual enters carrying bitterness, suspicion, and complaint. Soon arguments emerge where none previously existed. Consciousness is contagious. This is why leadership begins long before titles. The greatest leaders first governed themselves. Ancient Rome admired generals who conquered nations. Stoic philosophers admired those who conquered pride. Confucius taught that a ruler who lacks integrity eventually weakens the entire kingdom. Indigenous elders often reminded young people that children rarely become what they are told. They become what they consistently witness. Every generation learns more from examples than instructions. Ask yourself an uncomfortable question. If everyone around you quietly adopted your daily habits, would the world become wiser or more confused? Would families become more compassionate? Music. Would workplaces become more honest? Would communities become more patient? Ancient teachers constantly invited this form of self-examination because they understood a profound law. History is built one ordinary decision at a time. Many imagine awakening as a private achievement meant only for personal peace, yet authentic awakening naturally expands outward. The person who has discovered inner stability becomes more generous. The one who understands forgiveness creates healthier relationships. The one who has mastered fear encourages courage in others without even intending to. Personal transformation quietly becomes collective transformation. This is how civilizations heal, not all at once. One conscious human being after another. The next generation does not inherit only our wealth. Music, it inherits our thinking, our emotional habits, our courage or cowardice, our integrity or compromise, our hope or despair. Long before children learn language, they absorb atmosphere. They study how adults handle disappointment, success, conflict, music, gratitude, and uncertainty. Every parent, teacher, mentor, and elder becomes a living philosophy whether they realize it or not. The future is always watching. Ancient Hebrew wisdom advised parents to impress wisdom upon children. When you sit at home and when you walk along the road, the instruction was never merely about words. It described a way of living so consistent that wisdom became visible. Children remember character longer than lectures. Perhaps this explains why history remembers certain individuals for centuries. Their greatest legacy was not information but embodiment. They became living demonstrations of principles. Others wish to imitate. The forgotten future will not be created by more technology alone. It will be created by greater consciousness guiding technology wisely. It will not be built merely through economic growth. It will require moral growth. It will not emerge from louder opinions. It will emerge from deeper understanding. Changing yourself changes history. Music, not because you control the world, but because every transformed life becomes another quiet light in the darkness. And light has always multiplied more naturally than fear. Chapter 12. Plotinus and the Journey Back to the One. Among all the philosophers of the ancient world, few spoke about the human soul with the quiet beauty music of Plotinus. Living during the 3rd century, Plotinus taught that beneath the countless music differences dividing humanity, there exists a single eternal reality. He simply called the One. It cannot be fully described because every word divides what is actually whole. It is the source from which all beauty, goodness, wisdom, and life continually flow. Everything originates from unity. Everything longs to return. To Plotinus, separation was never the deepest truth. It was appearance. Imagine sunlight passing through stained glass windows of many colors. One window glows blue, another red, another gold. Someone looking only at the windows might assume different lights exist inside each one. Yet the light itself remains one. Only the colors differ. Human beings resemble those windows. Cultures differ, languages differ, personalities differ, beliefs differ. But the light giving life to each person, music, comes from the same mysterious source. This realization changes how we see ourselves and how we see others. An old story tells of a sculptor in ancient Alexandria who spent years carving an enormous marble figure. A young apprentice watched daily, puzzled that the master often sat silently for hours before striking the stone. Music, finally, he asked. "Master, why do you wait so long before using your tools?" The sculptor smiled. "I am not deciding what to create." He gently touched the marble. "I am listening for what wishes to emerge." Day after day, the apprentice observed this strange practice music, until one morning the finished statue stood before them. "It is magnificent," the apprentice whispered. "How did you know it was hidden inside?" The old sculptor answered softly, "I removed everything that was not the statue." Plotinus believed the soul's journey follows the same pattern. Awakening is less about adding something new than removing everything false. Pride, identity, not fear, separation. Music, what remains has always been there, the true self. This teaching echoes many ancient traditions. The Upanishads declare that the deepest self is one with ultimate reality. Hermetic writings speak of humanity remembering its divine origin. Mystics across cultures describe the same ascent using different languages. The climb always leads inward. Modern life encourages constant outward movement. We chase achievements, possessions, approval, and endless stimulation. Plotinus invited the opposite movement. Turn inward not to escape the world music to see it clearly. He warned that excessive attachment to appearances gradually fragments the soul. We become identified with temporary roles rather than eternal being. Success inflates us. Failure destroys us. Praise controls us. Criticism wounds us. We forget the quiet center beneath changing circumstances. This is why inner stillness becomes sacred. Stillness is not empty. It is revealing. Music when muddy water is constantly stirred, nothing beneath the surface can be seen. Leave it untouched and the sediment slowly settles. The water becomes transparent without forcing it. The mind behaves similarly. Constant distraction clouds perception. Stillness restores clarity. Today, silence often feels uncomfortable because noise has become normal. Phones vibrate. News never sleeps. Opinions compete for attention every moment. Yet Plotinus might gently ask whether humanity fears silence because silence reveals what distraction successfully hides. Many answers arrive only after the noise ends. Ancient monks understood this. Hermits retreated into deserts not because they hated humanity, but because they wished to hear reality without interruption. They discovered that solitude eventually becomes companionship with truth. Stillness teaches what argument cannot. Cultivating inner stillness does not require abandoning ordinary life. It begins with simple practices. Rise a few minutes before the world awakens. Sit quietly without rushing toward the day. Observe thoughts without chasing them. Walk without headphones occasionally. Listen more than you speak. Long gratitude to interrupt worry. Let silence become familiar rather than frightening. These small moments gradually restore forgotten unity. As awareness deepens, another transformation quietly occurs. You stop seeing life as countless disconnected events. Instead, patterns appear. Every hardship shaped compassion. Every disappointment redirected purpose. Every relationship became a teacher. Every mistake carried hidden instruction. Even painful seasons reveal unexpected wisdom. Nothing was wasted. The soul had always been returning. Plotinus described spiritual ascent as becoming increasingly like the source from which we came. More peaceful, more loving, more truthful, more beautiful, not merely in appearance but in character. This ascent is available every day. Each patient response instead of anger. Each truthful word instead of deception. Each generous act music instead of selfishness. Each moment of awareness instead of unconscious habit. Every such choice becomes another step home. The world often teaches that fulfillment lies somewhere ahead. Plotinus gently whispers another possibility. Perhaps fulfillment is not ahead. Perhaps it is beneath the layers we have mistaken for ourselves. Return begins within, and every quiet moment becomes another step toward the one from which we have never truly been separated. Chapter 13. The Return of the Forgotten Self. Music. There is an old saying found in many wisdom traditions that the greatest tragedy is not that human beings are weak, but that they have forgotten their strength. Ancient philosophers, mystics and sages rarely described enlightenment as acquiring something entirely new. Music, they described it as remembering. Beneath every layer of fear, every social role, every disappointment, and every borrowed belief, there remains something untouched. The Egyptians spoke of the immortal soul. The Hermetic teachers called it the divine mind reflected within humanity. Plato hinted that learning itself is a form of recollection. The Gnostics called music it the divine spark sleeping beneath the illusions of the world. Different civilizations used different languages. They pointed toward the same reality. Modern life constantly encourages us to define ourselves by what changes. We introduce ourselves through professions, possessions, achievements, political opinions, appearances, or past experiences. Yet every one of these identities shifts with time. Careers end. Bodies age. Wealth rises and falls. Relationships change. Public approval disappears as quickly as it arrives. If identity depends upon changing things, peace can never remain stable. Ancient wisdom invited a deeper question. Who remains when everything temporary is removed? There is a story told among early desert mystics about a prince who was kidnapped as a child music and raised among shepherds in a distant valley. He grew into adulthood believing he was poor because everyone around him lived simply. He learned to herd sheep, repair fences, and survive difficult winters. He became skilled, hardworking, and respected among the villagers, yet he always carried an unexplainable longing that no success could satisfy. One spring morning, an elderly traveler entered the valley, carrying a weathered scroll sealed with the royal insignia. After searching for several days, he found the shepherd and quietly handed him the document. The young man laughed. "You must have mistaken me for someone important." The traveler smiled gently. "I have not mistaken you. You music have mistaken yourself." Inside the scroll was the story of his birth, the mark placed upon him as an infant, and the truth that he had always been heir to a kingdom he never knew existed. The scroll did not make him a prince. Music, it reminded him that he already was one. The remainder of his life was not spent becoming royalty. It was spent learning how to live as what he had always been. Music, this ancient parable mirrors the human condition more closely than we often realize. Most people spend decades searching outside themselves for permission to become worthy, peaceful, confident, or fulfilled. Yet the music, greatest teachers consistently reverse the direction of the search. Look inward not because the world lacks beauty, but because the one seeking has forgotten their own. Hermes taught that humanity carries within itself a reflection of the divine mind. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that the soul takes on the color of its thoughts. Plotinus described the spiritual life as polishing a mirror until it once again reflects its original light. The Eupupanids declared that the deepest self is not separate from ultimate reality itself. The message never changed. Remember, awareness becomes the first step toward this remembrance. Before reacting, pause. Before judging, observe. Before identifying with every passing emotion, ask quietly, who is noticing this experience? That simple question shifts something profound. You begin discovering the observer behind the personality. Thoughts continue to appear. Emotions continue to rise and fall. Circumstances continue changing, yet awareness remains. Calm, silent, present like the sky that is never damaged by passing storms. This remembrance also transforms sovereignty. Ancient kings ruled territories. Ancient sages ruled themselves. One commands armies, the other commands attention. One governs nations, the other governs fear, pride, resentment, and desire. The second kingdom lasts longer. Music or sovereignty means refusing to surrender your peace to every external event. Praise no longer intoxicates you. Criticism no longer defines you. Success becomes a gift rather than an identity. Failure becomes instruction rather than condemnation. Freedom quietly expands. There is another story preserved among early monastic communities about an old craftsman famous throughout the region music for carving beautiful wooden bowls. Visitors assumed he possessed extraordinary music talent, yet when they watched him work, his movements appeared remarkably simple. One young apprentice finally asked, "Master, what secret allows your hands to create such beauty?" The old man placed his carving knife upon the table. "My hands did not become extraordinary." He touched his chest. "I simply stopped allowing my heart to become divided." The apprentice looked puzzled. When the heart is divided, the old craftsman continued, the hands become restless. When the heart becomes whole, every ordinary action begins expressing something eternal. His bowls were never merely bowls. They became visible peace. The forgotten self does not remove you from ordinary life. It transforms the way you live it. Cooking becomes gratitude. Listening becomes compassion. Working becomes service. Silence becomes nourishment. Relationships become opportunities to recognize the same divine light within others. The awakened person does not necessarily live differently because life has become easier. They live differently because they have remembered who is living. Music. This remembrance must become embodied. It is not enough to admire wisdom or collect inspiring ideas. Every ancient school insisted upon practice. Awareness must become habit. Integrity must become action. Compassion must become instinct. Courage must become daily choice. Knowledge remembered but never lived slowly fades back into forgetfulness. Each morning offers another invitation. Before entering the noise of the day, become still for a few moments. Remember the observer behind the thoughts. Remember the dignity that cannot be purchased or lost. Remember that your deepest identity existed long before fear began telling its stories. Then walk into the world carrying that remembrance. Not loudly, not proudly, quickly, steadily. Let your presence become your teaching. Remember who you are. Chapter 14. Remember who you really are. Every great journey eventually reaches a surprising conclusion. The traveler discovers the treasure was never entirely separate from the one seeking it. After countless roads, endless questions, difficult trials, and unexpected teachers, the destination reveals itself not as a distant place but as a deeper way of seeing. So it is with the human spirit. Throughout these pages we have walked beside philosophers, music, mystics, emperors, monks, poets, and seekers. We have explored awareness, discipline, courage, humility, remembrance, and the divine mind. At first these ideas may have appeared like separate teachings gathered from different civilizations. Now their unity becomes visible. Nothing truly new has been learned. Something ancient has been remembered. The soul has always carried within itself a quiet memory of its origin. Sometimes that memory awakens through suffering. Sometimes through silence, sometimes through beauty, sometimes through loss. Whatever the doorway, the destination remains remarkably similar. You remember that you are more than your fears, more than your successes, more than your failures, more than your history, more than music, the opinions that others have placed upon you. Ancient wisdom never asked human beings to become someone else. It invited them to remove everything false until only truth remained. Returning to the divine mind is not escaping ordinary existence. It is seeing ordinary existence with extraordinary awareness. Washing dishes becomes mindfulness. Walking beneath trees becomes gratitude. A difficult conversation becomes an opportunity for compassion. Even disappointment becomes instruction rather than punishment. Consciousness changes before circumstances do. And when consciousness changes, circumstances often begin revealing possibilities that fear previously concealed. Inner freedom does not promise a life without challenges. Plotinus faced misunderstanding. Socrates accepted death rather than abandoned truth. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire during war and plague. None escaped difficulty. They escape slavery to difficulty. That is the deeper freedom. The soul's homecoming happens quietly. There are no trumpets announcing it. There is no external certificate proving it has occurred. One day you simply notice that anger releases more quickly than before. Gratitude appears more naturally. Silence no longer feels empty. Compassion replaces judgment. You become less interested in appearing wise and more interested in living wisely. The journey continues, but the traveler has changed. Perhaps this explains why every enduring wisdom tradition eventually points beyond books. Books illuminate the path, but they cannot walk it. Teachers inspire awakening, but they cannot awaken another person on their behalf. The final responsibility always returns to the individual. Every illusion becomes an invitation to awaken. Every struggle becomes a doorway to wisdom. Every fear becomes a teacher. Every ordinary day becomes another opportunity to remember. Tomorrow morning, the same sun will rise over cities filled with hurried people. Many will continue believing peace lies somewhere outside themselves. Others will begin quietly remembering what the ancient sages never stopped teaching, that the deepest transformation begins within the silent sanctuary of awareness. The world may appear unchanged, yet one awakened heart subtly changes the world it touches. That is how every lasting civilization has begun. One conscious life at a time, one remembered soul at a time, one act of quiet courage at a time. And perhaps as you close this final chapter, you will recognize that the journey has not ended. Music, it has simply become your own. The awakening code was never hidden inside forgotten temples or secret manuscripts. It has always been written within human consciousness itself. Music, Socrates called it self-knowledge. Plato called it the ascent from shadows. Hermes called it remembering the divine mind. The Gnostics called it awakening from forgetfulness. Music, different names. One eternal invitation. Remember who you really are, and the world you see begins to change with